Hi, everyone, and welcome to Taking Up Space with Jordan. I'm your host, Jordan. I started this podcast as a way to help women build their dream lives, not by pretending it's always beautiful or easy, but by talking honestly about the good, the ugly, and yes, even the boring parts of going after what you want. Because let's be honest, it's not always glamorous. Today, we're going to talk shit about somebody, just a little bit. And it's about a bitch that we all know very well, and that is your inner critic. Because we all have one, and she is trained to remember every failure, every almost failure, every awkward moment. Every time you said something you immediately wished you could crawl into the earth and die. And she has an incredible talent for showing up at exactly the wrong time, usually right when you're about to do something brave or bold. I've had to do a lot of work around that voice in my head, the one that tells me to stop, to play it safe, to follow the easier, more acceptable path. But here's the thing. As much as I hate to admit it, the inner critic does actually have a role. Not because she's right, not because she's kind, but because she gives you the chance to practice defending your dreams. Because if you can learn how to protect your goals from your own doubt, you'll be a lot more prepared to protect them from anyone else who has the audacity to question or minimize what you're building. So if your inner critic has been a little extra loud lately, if she's been talking you out of things that you care about, then this episode's for you, and we're going to get into it. So let's think about this for a second. When you first hear that critical voice, do you recognize it? A lot of times our inner critic is the voice of someone from our childhood. Not always, but typically. It could be a teacher, a mentor, a friend, some random asshole on the street that said something that just stuck with you. And before you tune out and think, well, I didn't have a super traumatic childhood, so this probably doesn't apply to me at all. Let me say this. Your inner critic doesn't have to come from abuse to still be loud. Sometimes it actually comes from pressure or comparison or constantly being corrected instead of encouraged. For me, for a long time, that voice was actually my stepfather. He was the kind of person who only praised you when it served him, when there was an audience, when it helped him look like the doting father figure or husband. But behind closed doors, though, the criticism, it came fast and it came often. Nothing was ever quite good enough for this person. And the wild thing is, even after I had cut him out of my life, his voice was the one that stayed. But I didn't recognize it at first because I didn't want to listen to it closely. I would avoid it. I would distract myself. I would try and stay busy because actually hearing what that inner critic was saying felt unbearable. But the problem was it wasn't just going away. It just got louder. So I had to turn around and listen. I started doing this in small moments because let's be honest, hearing that man's voice is grating. And I would do this while I would journal, on a quiet car ride home, in those seconds before my brain was like turning off and falling asleep. And that's, when it decides to replay everything you've done wrong that day. And instead of arguing with that critic, I started asking questions, started practicing curiosity. Things like, what are you actually afraid of? What are you trying to stop me from doing? Whose words are these really? And then one day, it finally said something I had heard over and over again that finally made me realize whose voice it was. And it was the words, no one is going to want you if you keep that up. No one is going to want you. And that was the moment. Because I realized I was still letting someone else run the show, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but whose influence was still shaping how I showed up, how small I made myself, how safe I tried to be. When the mask comes off, your inner critic like that, it's not this dramatic battle scene. It's an aha moment. It's the moment you realize this isn't actually me. And you get to say, sometimes out loud, and I encourage that, I don't want to listen to you anymore. Now, I wish I could say that identifying it made the inner critic just disappear all at once, but that's not reality. But by identifying the critic is a huge step because you're no longer fighting a fog. You're facing something specific. And what's interesting is the voice that shows up for me now isn't actually the same one it used to be. It's no longer my stepfather's voice. These days, my inner critic sounds more like my younger self, the version of me that doesn't quite understand that adult life includes things like groceries, shopping, paying bills, resting, and, responsibilities that don't look like chasing a dream 24/7. And honestly, I think that's kind of amazing because the fact that my inner critic has changed tells me that I've changed. It's adapted as I've grown. So if your inner critic shifts or morphs over time, I want you to recognize that as a sign of growth, not failure. That voice evolves because you are evolving. And because I know who it is now, I do in fact treat it differently. When I was dealing with a voice rooted in cruelty and control, I could walk away from it because I had already faced that demon before. But the inner child critic, that one needs gentleness. That one needs reassurance, patience. And this is why identifying your inner critic matters so much, because you can't respond appropriately to a voice that you haven't named yet. So as you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself, when I mess up, whose tone do I hear? When I rest, what does that voice say? When I dream bigger, what's the warning that pops up? Because once you recognize it, you finally get to choose how you respond. And that changes everything. And once you've begun to recognize that inner voice, you can do a couple of things. The first you can do is say, fuck you, I'm not listening to you anymore. And honestly, there is absolutely a time and place for that. Sometimes that voice is rooted in cruelty, fear, or control, and it does not deserve a seat at the table. Sometimes the most self-respecting thing you can do is shut it down. But that approach will only last for so long. Because if the inner critic keeps coming back, and it usually does, that's where option 2 comes in, which is learning how to reparent the inner critic. I learned this through my own therapy journey, where I stopped treating the critic like an enemy and started treating it like a part of me, a part that formed for a reason, a part that learned at some point that being harsh, cautious, or controlling might keep me safe. Their inner critic isn't usually trying to ruin your life, as much as it might feel like it at some times. Their inner critic is actually trying to protect you from something. Usually it's rejection, embarrassment, failure, abandonment. The problem is it's using outdated tools. So reparenting isn't about arguing with the critic or silencing it completely. It's about showing it that you are capable of keeping yourself safe now. Now that's going to sound different from with each conversation. Sometimes it's, I hear that you're afraid, but I've got this. Sometimes it's, thank you for trying to protect me, but we don't need that strategy right now. Or I can handle discomfort without tearing myself apart. You're not telling the critic to disappear. You're telling it that it can rest. And this is where the real shifts begin to happen. Because instead of being ruled by fear, you start leading with trust. You trust in your ability to recover. You trust in your ability to learn. You trust in your ability to survive disappointment without self-destructing. Reparenting the inner critic is you stepping into the role that you needed back then. It's you becoming the steady, reassuring voice that says, you're allowed to try, you're allowed to mess up, and still be worthy. And over time, that voice is going to get louder, not because the critic disappears, but because it no longer runs the show. And what's so powerful about developing a deeper understanding of your inner critic is that you start to notice when and why it shows up. You begin to recognize the situations that make it feel like it needs to protect you. And it's in those moments, those exact moments, that you get to build deeper self-trust and stronger internal boundaries with yourself. For me, my inner critic tends to pop up when I'm at a fork in the road, like I am right now with my friends and family. And what I mean by this is when I'm really locked in, going after my dreams, choosing a path that looks different from the people around me, and my version of success isn't obvious or traditional, that's when the voice gets loud. And that's when it starts saying things like, why can't you be normal? Why can't you just do what they're doing? And none of that is actually helpful. It's just fear dressed up as logic. So when I notice that happening, I focus on 2 things: regulating my nervous system and creating space to have that internal conversation with myself instead of letting the critic run wild. So here are a few tools that I do. First, our first tool is actually shrinking that to-do list. If my inner critic is especially loud in the mornings, I intentionally limit my to-do list to just 2 things. And I try to complete them early in the day so I can have those quick, achievable wins and show that critic that I am, wow, these are going really fast all of a sudden. Show that I am actually capable of creating success in my own way, even if that success looks like unloading the dishwasher or making my bed, because sometimes the smallest actions are what help reset your sense of self. The second one is moving the body. When I feel restless or stuck, like I can't focus on my goals, I take myself on solo walks. Living in the Pacific Northwest, that's not always realistic, especially when it's rainy and gross out. So I'll also go to the gym or sometimes just dance around in my house. Because what people don't realize is that your inner critic carries a lot of energy. So you have to get the wiggles out. And when you move your body, you give that energy somewhere to go. It stops bouncing around in your head and it starts leaving your body, turning into something more grounding, something more empowering, and allowing you to choose what you want to focus on instead of feeling all of this pent upness that's going on. Now, our third one might sound super simple, but honestly, long, warm showers have been incredibly healing for me lately. I've started making more of a ritual out of them, like turning on candles for ambiance, putting on a movie soundtrack, and letting myself fully immerse myself in the feeling of just like being clean and letting the water kind of wash away my problems for the day. Because one thing that's really nice about being in the shower is like you're not on your phone, you're not absorbing any new bad news or breaking news, and it allows me to just slow my nervous system down and remember that this is not a state of emergency. I don't need to rush through this shower. I can spend an extra 5 minutes doing what I want to do. And our fourth one, which is not a shock, but will be the first time I brought this up in the new year, I believe, which is journaling. I love journaling the critic. When my inner critic is particularly persistent, I pull out my journal and I write down exactly what it is saying, word for word, and then I respond to it in a way I would respond to a scared friend, with compassion and truth. This practice has helped me separate my true voice from the protective one that's just trying to keep me small. And I want to give an example because this happened recently. A couple days ago, I was really beating myself up over getting rejection after rejection for new jobs, as well as just some things that I was working on the side. And my inner critic decided that was the perfect moment to pop up and say some shit. And she was like, see, you're not capable of being successful. And to right then in that moment, I went, you are right. And for the next hour, I had this dragging feeling like I was never going to amount to anything. I wasn't even capable of making dinner. I can't even keep my house clean. It was just Debbie Downer after Debbie Downer thing. And then I stopped in my tracks and went, we got to reset. So I went and took a shower, was still feeling weird. Or no, I went on a walk, was still feeling weird. So I took a long shower, was still feeling weird. So I decided make myself my favorite warm beverage with some hot cocoa, sat down in my favorite chair, got my favorite blanket, and I started journaling. And I wrote those words out, seeing where it was, see, you are never going to be a success. And I responded with 1 rejection. Even 5 rejections in one day does not mean that this is the end all be all of my life. We cannot allow just a bad day, a bad moment to turn into a bad day. And just allowing myself to kind of write out and redefine what I thought was success for the day, what I thought was success for the next month or even a couple of weeks, that allowed me to kind of create a plan with the critic to show her that, hey, we're going to get rejections. We're expecting rejections. Just like we can't be perfect every single day of the week, we can't be perfect to every single person that we reach out to. And that's okay. And so all in all, these tools aren't about avoiding the critic. They're about creating enough space to hear it without letting it control you. And the more you practice this, the quieter the critic actually becomes. Not because it disappears, but because your authentic voice starts getting louder. Because here's what I've learned. Your inner critic will always have something to say, but you get to decide how much power it has. And when you start building that relationship with yourself, when you learn to recognize the voice, reparent it, and regulate through it, that's when you stop playing small. And that's when you start taking up space. That's the name of the podcast. Get it? To wrap things up today, we're going to get things wrong. We are going to be fools in the world. We are going to make mistakes. That is not a failure of your dream life. That is the dream life. Because building a life that actually belongs to you requires experimentation. It requires trying things without knowing how they'll turn out. And it requires being willing to look silly, to change your mind, to learn as you go. Your inner critic will always have opinions about that. It will want certainty. It will want guarantees. And it will want you to choose the path that looks safest from the outside. But safety isn't the same thing as fulfillment and happiness. And growth isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to move forward while fear is talking. So if you're listening to this and you're feeling stuck or behind or like you should have it all figured out by now, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are learning how to trust yourself. And every time you listen to your inner voice with compassion, every time you choose curiosity over self-criticism, every time you take one small step towards the life that you want, you are building your dream life in real time. Not perfectly, not even loudly, but honestly. And that's more than enough. Thank you so much for listening to this week. I really hope you try one of the tools we talked about and spend some time getting curious about your inner critic. I know I did call her a bitch earlier, which is fair, but consider this her character development, because now she's more like that brutally honest friend who means well, definitely wants me to win, just in her own dramatic way. Wherever you are in the world, try having a conversation with your inner critic this week. See where the two of you land together. Kisses!